In a shocking television moment that has Hollywood and viewers across America talking, megastar Tom Cruise was kicked off The Late Show after a heated exchange with Stephen Colbert turned explosive. What started as routine publicity for Cruise's latest blockbuster quickly devolved into the most uncomfortable and tense confrontation seen on late-night television in years. The tension was palpable from the moment Tom Cruise walked onto the set of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Studio audience members later reported that Colbert seemed unusually agitated even before the interview began, barely acknowledging Cruise during the commercial break as the action star took his seat. The typical pre-show banter was noticeably absent, replaced by what one audience member described as cold silence. When the cameras started rolling again, Colbert's introduction seemed cordial enough, highlighting Cruise's impressive career and mentioning his new film, Altitude Horizon. However, keen-eyed viewers noticed Colbert's smile didn't reach his eyes, and his posture remained stiff, warning signs of what was to come. "Tom, welcome back to the show," Colbert began with a tight smile. "It's been what, 3 years since you've graced us with your presence?" "Great to be here, Stephen," Cruise replied enthusiastically, seemingly oblivious to the host's unusually cold tone. "I've been busy filming, but I'm excited to be back and talk about Altitude Horizon. We really pushed the boundaries with this one." "Pushing boundaries seems to be your thing," Colbert interrupted, his tone shifting suddenly. "Both on and off screen, from what I understand." The studio audience fell quiet as Cruise's smile faltered slightly. "Well, I like to give audiences something they've never seen before." "Speaking of things people haven't seen," Colbert cut in, leaning forward in his chair, "let's talk about some of the more controversial aspects of your personal life that you've managed to keep out of the public eye lately." The camera caught Cruise's publicist at the edge of the set, suddenly alert and concerned. Cruise himself maintained his composure, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I'm here to talk about the film, Stephen," Cruise replied evenly. "The team worked incredibly hard." Yes, everyone always works incredibly hard," Colbert said dismissively, waving a hand. "But I think viewers might be more interested in discussing your long-standing relationship with certain controversial organizations. Care to comment on the recent exposé published last week?" The audience gasped. There had indeed been a critical piece published about Cruise's religious affiliations, but unspoken late-night etiquette dictated that such topics were typically avoided unless agreed upon beforehand. The publicist was now furiously signaling to a producer off-camera. "Stephen, I think you know that's not what I'm here to discuss," Cruise said, his famous smile now completely gone. "We agreed on talking points before the show." "Did we?" Colbert asked with exaggerated innocence, turning to look directly at the camera. "I don't recall agreeing to softball questions only. This is The Late Show, not a promotional infomercial." The tension in the studio was electric. Several audience members later posted on social media that they felt like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. Cruise's publicist had now moved closer to the stage, speaking urgently with a show producer. "I've always been straightforward about my beliefs," Cruise responded, his voice controlled but tight. "But tonight I'm here as an actor to discuss a film that hundreds of talented people worked on for years. I think they deserve that respect." "Respect is an interesting concept," Colbert pressed, ignoring the frantic signals from his own producer. "Let's talk about respect for a moment. Do you believe your organization respects former members who've spoken out against its practices?" At this point, Cruise set down the glass of water he'd been holding with such force that some of it sloshed onto the desk between them. The camera caught the moment perfectly, a visual representation of the star's barely contained frustration. "Stephen, I've been on a lot of shows over a lot of years. I've never been ambushed like this," Cruise said, his voice now carrying an edge that his fans would recognize from his more intense film roles. "If you wanted to have this conversation, your team should have approached mine. This isn't journalism, It's just cheap sensationalism." The audience was dead silent now. Colbert seemed to feed off the tension, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied expression that suggested this was exactly the reaction he'd been hoping to provoke. "Is it sensationalism to ask questions that people want answers to?" Colbert retorted. "Your new movie has you playing a character who exposes corruption and stands for truth. I thought you might appreciate some authenticity in this conversation." "There's a difference between authenticity and ambush tactics," Cruise replied. The famous actor was now visibly containing his anger, a rare sight for a star known for his meticulously maintained public image. "You know these weren't the agreed-upon talking points." "Oh, I'm sorry," Colbert said with mock contrition, glancing at his notes. "Was I supposed to ask how you did your own stunts for the millionth time? Or maybe we should discuss how you stay so youthful-looking. Would that be more comfortable?" The sarcasm was biting, and several audience members later described feeling deeply uncomfortable. Cruise's publicist was now at the edge of the stage, clearly contemplating intervention. "You know what, Stephen?" Cruise said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I've respected you as a host for years. I've always thought you were better than this kind of tabloid ambush. And I've always thought you were more than just a mouthpiece for a controversial organization," Colbert shot back. "I guess we're both disappointed tonight." The audience audibly gasped. This was unprecedented territory for The Late Show. ICE, program known for pointed political commentary, but typically respectful celebrity interviews. Something had clearly gone very wrong behind the scenes, though speculation would later run rampant about whether this was a planned confrontation or a spontaneous departure from the script. As the tension reached its peak, the network cut to a commercial break. Audience members reported that during the break, a heated argument erupted between Cruise's team and Colbert's producers, with raised voices clearly audible despite efforts to maintain privacy. When the cameras started rolling again, the atmosphere had changed dramatically, and what happened next would send shockwaves through the entertainment industry and social media alike. The red light on the camera blinked back to life, and viewers at home were greeted with a visibly agitated Tom Cruise, now standing beside the desk, rather than seated in the guest chair. Colbert's smug expression had hardened into something more defensive as he addressed the audience. "Welcome back to The Late Show," Colbert said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that couldn't mask the tension. "We're here with Tom Cruise discussing his new film and apparently having what network executives might call an authentic moment. Let's be clear about what's happening here," Cruise interjected, not waiting for Colbert's next question. The megastar had abandoned his usual polished demeanor, his hands gesturing emphatically. "You invited me here under false pretenses. Your team specifically agreed to certain topics of discussion with my team." "The audience deserves more than prepackaged publicity," Colbert countered, swiveling in his chair to face Cruise directly. "They tune in for real conversations, not promotional monologues." "Hey, real conversations require mutual respect," Cruise fired back, something clearly lacking tonight. The camera panned to show audience members exchanging uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the good-natured banter they'd expected. This was genuine conflict playing out on live television. "Respect?" Colbert repeated, eyebrows raised. "Like the respect your organization shows to journalists who investigate it? Or former members who speak out?" Cruise's publicist was now visibly signaling to end the segment, but neither man on stage was paying attention to the frantic gestures. "You know what, Stephen?" Cruise said, his voice lowering dangerously. "I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've done thousands of interviews, and I can tell when someone's fishing for a viral moment instead of having an actual conversation." "Is that what I'm doing?" Colbert asked, affecting innocence while adjusting his glasses. "I thought I was asking questions that millions of Americans are curious about. Isn't that my job?" "Your job," Cruise retorted, "is to entertain, not to ambush guests to boost your failing ratings." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Colbert's ratings had indeed been slipping in recent months, losing ground to competitors in the late-night landscape. It was a sore point rarely mentioned so explicitly, especially by guests. Colbert's face flushed red. That's rich coming from someone whose last two films underperformed at the box office. Maybe that's why you're so desperate to control this narrative. The gloves were now completely off. Several audience members later posted that they'd never witnessed such raw hostility on a talk show, describing the atmosphere as so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. "I don't need to control narratives, Stephen," Cruise responded, his famous intensity now fully unleashed. "My work speaks for itself. 4 decades in this business, consistent success. What I won't stand for is being brought on a show under one pretense and then subjected to a hit job." Colbert stood up now too, no longer lounging behind his desk. The two men were now facing each other, neither willing to back down, both clearly furious. "Hit job?" "I asked questions," Colbert said, his sarcasm cranked to maximum. "I'm so sorry. If that's offensive to someone who lives in a bubble of constant adulation and agreement." "You didn't ask questions," Cruise countered. "You made accusations disguised as questions. There's a difference. Don't insult everyone's intelligence by pretending otherwise." Behind the cameras, network executives were reportedly in panic mode. According to one staff member who later spoke anonymously to a major entertainment publication, frantic calls were being made about whether to cut the feed entirely, an almost unprecedented move for a live broadcast of this caliber. "Maybe I wouldn't need to disguise questions if your people didn't require such elaborate preconditions just to get you on the show," Colbert snapped. "Do you know how many pages of requirements your team sent over? It's like negotiating with a hostile nation, not booking a celebrity guest." "Standard industry practice," Cruise replied icily. "Though I'm starting to think we should have added, 'Host will not deliberately ambush guest with tabloid fodder' to the agreement. My mistake for assuming professional courtesy was a given." The studio audience was caught between discomfort and fascination, witnessing something rarely seen in the carefully choreographed world of late-night television. Several were filming on their phones despite the strict no-recording policy, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would be discussed for years to come. "Professional courtesy?" Colbert repeated with a harsh laugh. "Is that what you call it when your representatives threatened to blacklist our show if we brought up certain topics? When they demanded approval of every question? That never happened." "And you know it?" Cruise said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now you're just making things up to justify your behavior." "Am I?" Colbert challenged, picking up a folder from his desk and waving it. "Because I have the communication right here. Should I read it to the audience? Let them decide who's being unreasonable?" At this point, Cruise's publicist finally managed to interject herself into the situation, stepping onto the stage despite the camera operator's attempts to keep her out of frame. "This interview is over," she announced firmly, placing herself between Cruise and Colbert. "Tom, we're leaving." Colbert wasn't finished. "Running away when challenged. Isn't that exactly what critics say about your org?" "Enough!" Cruise thundered, his voice carrying the commanding presence that had made him a box office titan for decades. The entire studio fell silent. "You've made your intentions clear tonight, Stephen. You weren't interested in a conversation about my work. You wanted a gotcha moment, something to help your declining relevance in late night." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Colbert seemed momentarily taken aback by the raw emotion in Cruise's response. "This isn't journalism," Cruise continued, regaining his composure slightly. "And it certainly isn't entertainment. It's just cheap, and frankly, beneath what I thought this show stood for." Colbert's expression darkened further. "What I stand for is not being dictated to by celebrities who think they can control the media narrative through intimidation and—" But whatever Colbert was about to say next was cut short, as Cruise removed his microphone and dropped it on the desk with a loud thud that reverberated through the studio's audio system. "We're done here," Cruise said with quiet finality, turning toward the exit. Colbert, clearly not ready to relinquish control of his show, called after him. "That's right. Walk away. That's what you people always do when faced with legitimate questions." Cruise stopped in his tracks. For a breathless moment, the entire studio wondered if he would continue his exit or turn back for one final confrontation. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face Colbert one last time. "No, Stephen. What I'm doing is refusing to participate in whatever personal vendetta you're pursuing tonight," Cruise said, his voice carrying easily even without the microphone. "You've disrespected not just me, but your audience, your network, and the integrity of your own show." The audience, which had been murmuring uncomfortably, fell silent again. In that moment, many later reported that their sympathies shifted decisively toward Cruise, despite the actor's controversial affiliations. Colbert, perhaps sensing the room turning against him, attempted to regain the upper hand. "The audience deserves the truth, not carefully scripted publicity tours," he insisted, gesturing toward the crowd. But his words fell flat. Something had changed in the atmosphere. The entertainment reporter from Variety, who was present that night, would later write that it was the moment when Colbert's usual sharp wit crossed the line into something that felt uncomfortably personal and mean-spirited. "If you wanted the truth," Cruise replied, his voice steady, "you could have had an honest conversation. Instead, you chose ambush tactics for ratings. That's not truth-seeking. That's exploitation." Several audience members nodded in agreement, a fact not lost on Colbert, whose expression tightened further. "Mr. Cruise," called the show's producer from offstage, attempting to salvage the situation, "perhaps if we reset, we could focus on your film for the remainder of the segment?" But Cruise shook his head. "I think we're well past that point now." He turned to address the audience directly. "I came here tonight excited to share our film with you. I'm sorry that's not what happened." The sincerity in his voice resonated through the studio. Several audience members later described it as the moment when they fully realized how badly Colbert had mishandled the interview. "Don't apologize for him," someone called from the audience, triggering a smattering of applause that quickly grew in volume. Colbert's face registered shock as he realized he was losing his own audience. "We'll take another quick break," he announced abruptly, signaling frantically to the production booth. "No need on my account," Cruise replied. "I won't be here when you return." As Cruise headed toward the exit, a CBS executive rushed onto the stage, whispering urgently to Colbert, whose expression cycled through anger, disbelief, and finally, a grudging resignation. "Wait," Colbert called, his tone markedly different. "Tom, please wait." Cruise paused at the edge of the stage, one eyebrow raised questioningly. What happened next would be described by one audience member as the most reluctant apology in television history. Colbert, clearly under pressure from network executives now clustered just off camera, cleared his throat. "I may have crossed a line," he admitted, the words clearly painful for him to articulate. That's not how we typically conduct interviews here." "No, it's not," Cruise agreed simply, making no move to return to his seat. The studio had become uncomfortably warm under the lights, the tension palpable as the two men regarded each other across the distance. The network executive nodded encouragingly at Colbert, who looked like he was swallowing something bitter. "The questions about your personal affiliations were not part of our agreed discussion topics," Colbert finally conceded. "And for that, He hesitated, visibly struggling with the words, "I apologize." The apology hung in the air, its insincerity evident to everyone present. Cruise studied Colbert for a long moment before responding. "I accept that you felt pressured to say that," he said finally, a statement that caused several audience members to suppress laughter. "But I think we both know this interview can't be salvaged." "Tom," his publicist interjected quietly, "the car is waiting." Cruise nodded, then addressed the audience one final time. "Our film opens Friday. It's a story about integrity and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Ironically appropriate tonight. His trademark smile flashed briefly. Thank you for your support. With that, he exited stage left, leaving Colbert standing awkwardly beside his desk. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the host's evident discomfort as he shuffled his notes, uncertain how to proceed. "We'll be right back," he finally managed, his voice lacking its usual confident edge. But the damage was done. As the applause signs lit up, the response was tepid at best. Several audience members stood and headed for the exits themselves, an unprecedented show of disapproval. When the broadcast resumed, Colbert attempted to spin what had happened as one of those authentic television moments you just can't predict, but the strained smile and slight tremor in his voice told a different story. Social media was already exploding with clips of the confrontation, most commenters siding decisively with Cruise. By morning, the incident had made headlines across the entertainment world. Cruise control. Star walks after Colbert's ambush interview, read The Hollywood Reporter's front page. Late night low. Colbert's failed gotcha moment, declared Deadline. The fallout came swiftly. CBS executives issued a carefully worded statement expressing regret for any misunderstanding regarding interview topics and promising to review our pre-interview processes. Industry insiders recognized this as a thinly veiled admission that Colbert had indeed violated the agreed-upon parameters. The Late Show's ratings, already in decline, took an immediate hit. Viewers who had tuned in expecting Colbert's usual political commentary and light-hearted celebrity banter were disturbed by what many described as mean-spirited ambush tactics. 3 major celebrities scheduled to appear the following week suddenly developed scheduling conflicts. For Cruise, however, the incident ultimately proved beneficial. Public sympathy swung overwhelmingly in his favor, with many commentators noting his professionalism in the face of Colbert's increasingly hostile questioning. The film he had come to promote saw a surge in interest, with the confrontation generating more publicity than a standard interview ever could have. 1 week after the incident, CBS announced that The Late Show would be taking a brief production hiatus to realign our creative direction. Industry insiders recognized this as network speak for serious behind-the-scenes damage control. When Colbert returned to the air 2 weeks later, gone was the smug demeanor that had characterized the Cruise interview. His opening monologue included a more comprehensive apology, acknowledging that, in our zeal to ask hard questions, we sometimes forget the importance of basic respect and journalistic integrity. The incident became a case study in how not to conduct a celebrity interview, taught in broadcasting and journalism schools as an example of the fine line between hard-hitting questions and unprofessional ambush tactics. As for Tom Cruise, he addressed the confrontation only once, during a press junket in Tokyo. When asked about the incident, he simply said, "In this business, mutual respect is essential. When that breaks down, nothing productive can happen. I wish Stephen and his team all the best." The diplomatic response only enhanced his reputation for professionalism. The confrontation between Tom Cruise and Stephen Colbert ultimately became more than just a viral moment in late-night television. It sparked a broader conversation about interview ethics, celebrity expectations, and the increasingly blurred line between journalism and entertainment. In an industry often criticized for its superficiality, the incident served as a powerful reminder that beneath the glamour and scripted interactions, authentic human conflict can still erupt when respect is abandoned in pursuit of ratings.